welcome back to another exciting episode with Studio Miguel. This is David McLean, and today I'll be modeling. I'm working in Lexology's Modo, and this is based on a concept design I did for a client. They asked me to produce one of several sea creatures that would be frightening and scary but realistic. So I started off with concept sketches, and once those were approved, I jumped right into Modo. Now, one of the things about concepting stuff is it's hard for me to disconnect myself from the production, but it's really important to just draw something that looks good, that looks cool, that the client likes, and then work about how to make that a reality later. I actually ended up doing a pass on this particular creature in Zbrush, but as I'm not a Zbrush user, there was a huge learning curve on these 5 creatures as I produced this. You see here my backdrop image dropped into Modo, and once it was placed, I had a top-down view and a side view. Then I just started box modeling. I like to use these kind of a generic way to block in organic shapes. You just start off with boxes, and you slice and you cut and you move verts around until you have the look that you want. I'm working extensively with symmetry, so everything I do on one side of the model happens to the other side of the model. This is really important if you're going to work on something in Zbrush too, because you definitely want to be able to take advantage of the symmetry tools. Painting lots and lots of little crusty detail is monotonous, and if you only have to do half the work, then hey, that's great. So once I had my basic outline, then I just thickened it and started pulling the carapace down to give it some thickness. Again, box for the claws, boxes for the little thumb thingy there, boxes for everything. It all started off as boxes, which is a great way to model things. Now, most of the work that I do does not animate, so I don't necessarily have to concern myself with polyflow, edge loops, and things like that. It's good to have healthy edge loops wherever you can, but I tend to get lazy sometimes. For the most part, I didn't have any problems with the crab, especially nowadays that so many things get sculpted and modeled detail with displacement maps. Edge loops become less critical, especially for print work. For animation, it's totally different. This was a great creature because I knew that once I had one leg, I would have all 6. So that's why I love symmetry, I love flipping, and I love 3D. When I drew this guy, I had to draw all 6 legs and then to draw both pincers. But in 3D, you just do one and flip and repeat. So I tried really hard as I worked on this monster to build him up consistently and all together. You see here me working on the underbelly, even though I wasn't going to be seeing any part of the monster except the top. What happens to me a lot of times when I start modeling is I get carried away and I'll end up working on some little detail underneath there that no one's ever going to see. I'm sure that happens to a lot of modelers. Now, in hindsight, I actually modeled a lot of detail into my creature in Modo that I would not normally have added. Now, having been in Zbrush for a little while, I think I would have skipped, like you see the little ridges there on the front. I would have skipped those. I would have skipped some of the modeling that I do on the legs and the munging of things up. You see here. In fact, that actually worked to my detriment because I ended up subdividing my base mesh here so much in order to sculpt detail in Modo that it made things very difficult once I was in ZBrush. That brings me to a good point. The modeling tools, the sculpting tools in ZBrush are really great and they're really robust, but they just don't get you to a level of completion and ability that the tools in something like ZBrush or Mudbox do. Not without really high level of polygons. And I think that's really the catch-22 is by the time you subdivide this model to the point where I can put all the little the little bumps and crags and nooks and crannies and everything in there, then I have a really, really dense mesh. So it was inspired by the coconut crab, which you just saw there, very very popular in Micronesia. And yes, they are huge and terrifying looking. They are the largest terrestrial crab in the world. Of course, as you can tell by the overall design, it was inspired primarily in terms of color and texturing and just grossness. The actual crab resembles much more consistently a traditional crab that you would see. So just modeling in more details, points and things like that onto the arms. Again, using symmetry, I only have to do this to one side, so it's really a huge time saver. Starting with basic shapes, subdividing and then beveling to add more detail is an excellent way to create those kind of exoskeleton joints that you get. This was what I was talking about sculpting the leg detail in Modo, munging that up and trying to get it more organic looking. The problem is that those joints, while they're cool without some serious displacement and some normal maps, then it just doesn't look real. There's not enough detail in there. Because especially with organic things, what I've found to be the case is that the more detail you have, the more realistic it looks, the more believable it looks. Because in life, it's like it doesn't matter how close you look at something, there's always more detail. It's incredible how things are designed. It really is. It's, you know, you get down to the you know, they have those electron microscopes, and they'll look at, you know, the carapace on a crab, for instance, and there'll still be detail, even on the electron microscope that is just tiny and dirty. So at this point, I'm just kind of flipping around and pushing and pulling and adding more sculpt and more detail. My pincers, now I'm adding my antenna. Again, I tried to, part of the design of this is in my mind was that it would be very segmented, kind of robo-organic, which is exactly what happens in real life. Research is always critical on things like this, getting out and finding reference and looking closely at it. Now I'm going to pose my little guy onto a rail made by an excellent modeler and friend of mine, William Wardy. This is lots of just rotating, selecting, and rotating, and selecting, and rotating, and pose, and pose, and pose, and pose. One of the nice things about Modo is it has this awesome, you can tell it you want your center of rotation, your pivot point, to be an edge or a point. Of course, you can have it be custom based on screen, but especially with the legs and the pincers, by being able to select an edge deep inside that joint, I'm able to rotate it on that joint. It's a fantastic way to work, and I switch back and forth all the time. Now, I didn't actually record the texturing and the Zbrush sculpt on this. So what you see now is just a basic lighting setup and color texture. This is my first round of my client, and I wanted them to get an idea of what I was thinking in terms of, they'd seen and improved the concept art, but you know, once you see a render, things change a lot. So I just threw a quick light in, turned on global illumination, and rendered out a high res. In fact, in this entire series of creatures, these are all humongous renders. This is actually I think I rendered it at half size or 3/4 size, but the final was 24 inches across. So that's, I forget, 12 inches is 3,000, 6,000 pixels. I think I rendered it about 4,500 or 5,000 pixels across. Anyway, I did a color render with reflections, and then I did a matte render just to kind of show what the shape was doing. And the initial comments were, as I expected, it needs more detail. So I went through ZBrush, and this right here is my ZBrush displacement map, and followed by the ZBrush color map. I actually ended up painting for the very first time a model in ZBrush, and the final render I was really happy with. I thought it was pretty cool, and you'll see that coming up here in a second. So I hope you like it. Email me if you have any questions or you'd like to know something else about this. As always, you can find more of my work at my blog and at my website. Thanks a lot. I hope you enjoyed it.